Okay, let me go on, because now obviously you will ask me, okay, it's easy to say this, but how do Americans say, where is the beef? Like, what is this dimension, no? Okay, to specify this uniqueness of Hegel, I would like to begin by an essay by Alenka Zupancic, published in the volume Think Again, edited by Peter Holwart, which is basically a critique of Alain Badiou and of anti-philosophy in general. Her starting point of Alenka Zupancic is the basic motive of anti-philosophers. The assertion of some productive presence, like real life of society for Marx, existence for Kierkegaard, will for Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, which is irreducible to and excessive with regard to the network of philosophical concepts or representation. And I think this is maybe the basic, as it were, matrix of what Badiou calls anti-philosophy. The excess of preconceptual productivity over representation. This idea that representation is a theater of representation which is always as such blind for or obliterating, mystifying, displacing whatever its own decentered side of production. A quote from Alenka here: the post-Hegelian philosophy started off with this fundamental claim. Symbolic representations, which were traditionally considered as access to the truth and to the real of being, do in fact alienate us from being and deform it. As classical philosophy was suddenly recognized, as the queen of this representative misrepresentation. Indeed, if one were to name one central issue that singularizes the rise of modern thought, it is perhaps none other than precisely the issue of representation, its profound interrogation, and the consequent vast turn against the logic of representation. And then she goes on in a very nice way how in all different domains, like in art, representation, representative art, become problematic. In politics, precisely when we get representative democracy, always the questions exploded, but are all properly represented? Isn't there some part, like peuple, plebs, or whatever, which cannot be adequately represented in representative democracy? The big topic is the excess of presence over representation. Even in love, insofar as we can say marriage should, in bourgeois ideology, represent true love. And then you have all this topic, but can marriage represent love? And you have always this oscillation between celebrating democracy or marriage based on love as true representation, like we can all be represented, freedom to vote for all of us, and this deep doubt. But isn't there something in the very form of representation, political, which excludes some? Isn't there something in the very form of marriage that excludes true love, and so on and so on? I claim this would be one of my critiques. At the end, if you will have time, I want to add, I was thinking along about it, a critique of Meillassoux and so on also. This is for me one of the limitations maybe of Badiou, that he still remains within this field of opposition between pure productive presence and representation. Because on this his entire, almost politics is based. And I think this is pure ideological move where Badiou consciously plays on the ambiguity of the French term l'état, no? Which is state as l'état français, French state, and state as simply situation, the state of things. Out of this he draws, I think, in a totally illegitimate ideological move, the identity of the two. Because state and state in both meanings is always present. We cannot split one from the other. This means that on the one hand we cannot get rid of the state, we cannot get pure productive presence, but state always mystifies the productive presence, And then from here comes the late Badiou's weird political term of subtraction. My problem with it is that it involves an all too simple anti-totalitarian move. The idea is, if you want to assert directly the presence, you end up in totalitarian catastrophe. Like, who tried to do it? He enumerated this to me. Sendero Luminoso, Pol Pot, Chinese Cultural Revolution. So, since it's impossible to assert directly pure presence, to get rid of representation, but since representation is always mystifying, however you put it, this means authentic politics must be at a distance from state. In all the sympathies that I have for this position, because now comes the small obscenity I cannot resist telling you, I was a month and a half ago in Bolivia and Peru. And after a talk, a guy approached me and said, "Here, I have a book for you with a dedication." I was in a strange way proud of it. You know from whom? Will you guess? With your dirty Iranian.
Morales.
Sorry?
Morales?
Fuck Morales, that idiot who thinks capitalism killed Mother Nature. They didn't like it. I said there, at least one good thing that capitalism did. No. Sorry? Fuck. Well, this is your Iranian goat fucking idiots. Fucking. Abimael Guzman, Presidente Gonzalo, from prison, the boss of Sendero Luminoso, with admiration, blah, blah, blah. So that's interesting to know where one has friends. Sorry, let me go on. So, I claim that here, Badiou remains, again, too much in this, within this space of opposing productive presence and representation. And that what we should do is complicate things here. Second thing, I claim that here I follow, politically I don't agree with him, the American Marxist, okay. Moishe Postone, who developed very nicely a thesis with which I sympathize, namely how Marx, that we should strictly distinguish the Marxism of Marx. By Marxism he means what later passed as the Marxist doxa. The best expression of it would have been German ideology, and the last attack of it, the Indian summer of this Marxism of Marx, would have been that famous preface to the Critique of Political Economy. You know, that dogma fully quoted by Stalin, you know. There are different formations, and then superstructure follows the base, and so on and so on. This is, for me, purely post-philosophical, naive Marxism. But as Postone shows very clearly, after the failure of the revolution of 1850, Marx, of course, started to read Hegel, logic, and then, when, based on this, Marx returned to Critique of Political Economy, he no longer followed this line of thought. And you can see why, when you ask yourself a simple question: what is commodity fetishism? It's typical how Marx never calls it ideology, but calls it, you know, theological eccentricities of commodity. It is as if Marx, here I rely on Kojin Karatani, who pointed out how Marx begins with critique of critique of religion, then critique of state, blah, blah, then critique of political economy, which in a paradoxical way brings us back to the beginning. All of a sudden, Marx discovers that there is a theological dimension, not in the sense of there is God, of course, material, but as a mechanism which is not simply a false representation, but representation which is inscribed precisely as a false representation into the very core of a reality itself, which is why Marx has problems calling commodity fetishism ideology. Because ideology is superstructure. Whatever commodity fetishism is, it's not superstructure. And you know, this is, I always quote it, sorry for repeat to quote, a wonderful beginning of the subchapter on commodity fetishism in Capital. You all know it, but nonetheless, let me repeat it. A commodity appears at first sight an extremely obvious, trivial thing, but its analysis brings out that it is a very strange thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. Are you aware how strange it is, measured by standard, Marxist standards, what Marx is claiming here? The standard critique of ideology, here I agree with what you said before, would have been to say, in our ordinary life, we are caught in ideological mystifications, but critique of ideology should demonstrate how real life process engenders these ideological mystifications. Marx is saying here almost, not quite, of course, he's not idealist, the opposite. He says, no, in everyday life we think, oh, we are just dealing with ordinary material reality. The theological mystification is not that what you should dispel, it's what you should bring out. It's there implicitly. The critique doesn't criticize theological mystification, it brings it out. You don't see it, that it's already there. And I claim, again, that, okay, don't have time to go to this, but that the moment you take this into account, all this standard topic of presence representation explodes. Because it's no longer a problem of base, superstructure, infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. You have an superstructure which is not superstructure but in the very core of material production. Because, again, you know my old point, I nonetheless repeat it. The paradox of commodity fetishism for Marx, it's not our illusion. No, in everyday reality, bourgeois subjects don't live in illusions. You are, okay, you do, but in a more complex way. You are usually what? A British empiricist, no? I mean, no capitalist believes that there is something magic in money or whatever. They think, what? Visit British Stock Exchange. I did 10 years ago and got a wonderful message there, where it simply says, my God, I thought, wait a minute, are they Marxists? But of course they are not. You get a free leaflet where they tell you the following. You may think that there is something mystical, almost theological in speculations on the stock market. No, it's all about people. Exchange between people, people relating to each other, and so on and so on. So you see the paradox. The first step of critique is not to say, no, it's only relations within people which appear as relations within things or whatever. No, it's to say you think that it's only concrete people, but you do not see how, in order, in commodity, in capitalist society, in order to be active as concrete people, you need abstractions, you need theological mystification, which sustains reality itself. Or, to put it in the terms of the excess, the standard post-philosophical, anti-philosophical excess, you have this boring topic of how idealist philosophy tries to represent reality, actual life process, but there is an excess, something that true Hegelians we should do is to make a passage from the excess over representation, excess in the sense of an excessive element which cannot be represented, like true love or rebel which cannot be represented politically, to the excess of representation itself. The true enigma is, why does reality itself need representation to sustain itself as reality?